All right. Well, thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Ben Premack. I'm one of your hosts this evening. Please give me your attention for a moment so I can tell you a bit about tonight's panel, as well as the $500 donation, which will be made in honor of tonight's panelists to an organization that you, the audience, will pick from a list of organizations that they've nominated. So Becoming is an ongoing partnership between IGDA Seattle and Diversity Collective to highlight diverse video game industry leaders and hear their stories. Tonight's panel is the first of our 2021 series, and it highlights nonprofit and community leaders. We did run a series of panels back in 2020, and videos of those panels are available on our YouTube page at IGDA Seattle. So a little bit about your host tonight. So IGDA Seattle is a chapter of the International Game Developers Association, which is a professional association and global network of game developers with the mission of empowering game developers around the world to achieve fulfilling and sustainable careers. And Diversity Collective is a community within the Seattle Indies with the mission of supporting diversity and inclusion for minorities in game development. We have the opportunity tonight to learn from experienced and diverse leaders in nonprofit and community leadership who are each eager to share their story with you and answer your questions. Post your questions to Twitch, and the moderator will ask them during the Q&A session at the end of the panel. A little bit more about that $500 donation. There are going to be 5 organizations that you'll have the opportunity to pick from. The first one is Take This, whose mission is to support mental health in the video game development community. The second is Black Girls Code, and their focus on providing technology education for African American girls. The third is 52 and Change, which is a platform that engages a growing community of donors to support a different nonprofit every week. The fourth is the Adeola Ajayi Foundation, and their commitment to educating and empowering underprivileged children in Nigeria. And fifth is the Eleanor Cook Foundation and their program, Life Pack, which uses video games to end malnutrition. You can visit our Twitch and look for a link in the chat log to vote on which one of these organizations will receive the donation. And the $500 donation is sponsored in half by my firm, my law firm, Premack Rogers, and in half by Seattle Indies. I hope that you'll find tonight's panel both educational and encouraging as you pursue your own career paths. And now with that, I will go ahead and hand the microphone over to August, who is tonight's moderator. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. So I want to get right into it. We don't have a lot of time. We have so much to cover. Thank you, all of our panelists, for being here and for sharing your experience with us today. We're going to be talking about nonprofit and community leadership and covering a range of topics within that, like building and maintaining communities, community leadership during COVID, diversity and inclusion, nonprofit business management, and everything in between. But I want to start by introducing everyone on our panel. So I'll call you out in order of how you're appearing on my screen. And if you can just introduce yourself, explain what your current role is, and briefly how you came to be in your current position. So Erin, you're up first.
Hi, I'm Erin Sparkman, and I work at ScoreSide. It's an app to make giving a little bit more easy, and my background is in gaming for good. I was one of the founding members.
And Donald?
Yep, my name is Donald Harris. I'm executive producer over at Farbridge, a studio based in Austin, Texas. I founded an organization called ATX Game Makers, where I have a group of individuals that's focused on increasing the diversity in the gaming industry.
And Stephanie?
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Barish, and I am one of the founders and the CEO of IndieCade, which is an international festival of independent games. We're entering our 17th year, and we were really, we were created out of a sense of wanting to celebrate games and voices that weren't otherwise heard, like our own. and have been a really wonderful platform for so many people.
Next up is Eve.
Hi, I'm Eve Crevichet. I'm the Executive Director of Take This, which is a mental health research, advocacy, and training organization that works inside the game community for both game makers and game players.
And last but not least, Nika.
Hi, my name is Nika Nour. I aspire to be Batman. I'm currently the head of partnerships. It's my first week at GenVid Entertainment, and I have an extensive background in nonprofits, specifically C3s and C6. Most recently, I'm the outgoing executive director of the International Game Developers Association Foundation, where their mission is exclusively to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the video game industry.
Awesome. I'm super excited to talk with you all because I think what you all do in game development is so important to developers, but not often visible from the outside to gamers or folks outside of game development. So to start off, I want to get an idea from whoever would like to answer what some of the biggest contributors were to your early career growth, and when you were like how you leveraged your early experiences if they weren't in game development. Yeah, Eve.
I'll jump in, especially because this is my first job in the game industry, and I've been in the nonprofit sector for my entire career. I came 3.5 years ago to Take This from a long time fundraising, being a yoga teacher, going to grad school and getting an academic degree. And what brought me into games and what I've used out of my background in cultural studies and in nonprofit work is just that you can make change and do social change work and transformative work in any place. It's just a question of identifying what the levers are in that space. And so I'm doing the work I've always wanted to do. It just happens to be in games, and that's really exciting. And it doesn't make really a difference that I'm not in a space that I was familiar with prior to this.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, one of the questions that we get the most from our live Q&As is always like how do you get into games? How did you get to be where you were? Because a lot of people are looking for that first on-ramp or are looking for an on-ramp from a different career into the game industry, which is what you did. Donald, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so part of my path of getting into the games industry was I was actually speaking with someone on LinkedIn about this earlier. I utilized some of the current skills that I've had, which was in my case sales and selling products like Dell computers. I figured out, okay, what was the equivalent of that in the gaming space? And the thing that I came across was, oh, you can sell video game software such as, at the time it was Garage Games Torque game engine. And so I figured out everything that I needed to know about that and started to sell that as a product. And so that was my big, like super professional first big step into the games industry. And you know, that was also augmented by getting mentors who were already established in the industry. So like, you know, that was the other half. It's like going to these different events such as these and finding folks to be a mentor, be a mentee to, and learn from them and work my way into the industry.
Yeah, well, one thing I'm curious about, and I ask this on all our different panels, because depending on what area in game development you work in, the answer can be different. But I'm curious what role higher education played for you in your current role. Was it basically, is it necessary for where you are now? Erin.
Okay, so my degree is in entomology. I love insects. I really do. I love them. They're pinned all over on my house. But I didn't use my degree very much in what we're doing, other than the fact that talking to an awkward scientist is not as difficult, as getting through to like donors. Other than that, I worked part-time at Tech TV. Back then it was G4, I guess, just to earn money for college. So that was kind of how I started to get the rigmarole, and then found myself at Blizzard in Korea, of all things, doing production jobs, because I had a very junior, I mean, might as well call it an internship job, when I was in college. And then decided I kind of cared for video games a little bit more than I cared for bugs.
I'm curious if other people have a similar story. Was your education a direct on-ramp for where you are now, or are you doing something completely different?
So gosh, I think I've been in the industry for a long time, but I went to film school. There wasn't, there weren't any game programs, and all my friends thought I was completely insane when I started working on games and interactive media, because they were all really into film. Now, many of them have ended up following me now, but getting to be, people just, it was kind of the Wild West. And it still is. And what I was going to say about, what what kind of experience you need, or however you do it, you can invent what you want to do. And that is what is powerful about this industry, and probably a lot of industries. But certainly, we invented what we wanted to do, and we invented the kind of space we want to envision, and that's what we're constantly working towards. So you can create your own path. And I really believe in that. And I think you really have to, especially for a lot of people for which the cookie cutter doesn't fit.
I'd like to piggyback on that, Stephanie, because coming from my background, I don't have a higher education degree. And I literally, like I said before, I just figured out what skills applied in the gaming world. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to be in video games. I can sell like nobody's business. Let me go make that my business. And I think it's, even now that I'm this far into my career, and when we are looking at hiring people at my current studio, we'll look at education, but a lot of the times we'll just look at what people are doing. Like if you have great examples of your work and you know how to work with a group, you can get in, right? It's interesting, and I think Erin and I were talking about this before in the green room. It's like, we've both spoken to people at UT and students at UT. I'm not downplaying a higher education. It's great. But, like Stephanie said, you can definitely forge your own path if you want to get into games.
That's a good segue, because Stephanie and Donald, both of you are founders of IndieCade. Stephanie and Donald, you founded ATX Game Makers. So I want to hear more about what the process was like building that up from the beginning, and like what your original goal was for your community and for the group, and how that is different now than when you started, if that's changed at all.
Yeah, so I'll start. So when I first founded ATX Game Makers, this was maybe about 3 or 4 months before the pandemic, right? So I don't know if anybody remembers that world, but the original goal was to, at the time, there was a meetup in Austin that was closing down. And so I wanted to start a meetup, but I wanted it to have the purpose of increasing diversity in the industry. Because like I mentioned before, when I did have a mentor helping me get into the industry, there were certain things that I couldn't identify with that mentor. My mentor was great and I love him to death. But there were still certain things that, because he didn't look like me, there were certain bits of information and, nuances that I couldn't get from him. And so with ATX Game Makers, that's what I wanted to create. And what we were doing in the beginning is we were having monthly meetups where I would go out to the Austin community and invite all of my friends who were already in the industry to come out to these mixers and just literally mingle with folks and share information. And it was just to show that, you know, it was basically designed to allow people to get access to information that they otherwise wouldn't get. And so now the way it's changed is because we're all locked indoors, and every other week I'm trying to figure out, when is it safe? When do I feel responsible enough to go out and have a public event? We're now all meeting in Discord. And so the mentorship continues in Discord, and that's how we're just building up the community and giving back to the community, right? So I have a bunch of professional friends and folks that are in the industry, and people come to the Discord and pair up with them, and they learn and they grow. And we've gotten a lot of success stories of people coming in and getting into the industry. Let me just take a little bit more time here. One of my favorite stories just happened to me. There was a gentleman that, you know, I was working with him on his resume and helping coach him on interviewing skills, this, that, and the other. Boom, bada boom, he gets a job, right? And I'm so super happy for him. 2 weeks later, I get a direct message from him saying, "Hey, I'm going to be at the meeting Friday." And I'm like, what are you talking about? "I'm going to be at the meeting Friday." And I was like, "Man, what are you talking about?" As it turns out, I had a meeting planned with an executive at the company that he was working at, and he's a part of that meeting. And that just made my day. It was just like, great. You know, like, I helped someone get in the industry, and I literally get to work with them 2 weeks later. So yeah, that's what it's all about. It's just helping folks achieve their dream.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
I do have
My
to say,
sto-
oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. I do have to say, you brought up the mixers, Donald. I find that when people are like, "Oh, how do I change? How do I jump in my career?" Those mixers were such a helpful thing for so many people to go from, "Oh, I used to run community for Gears of War Reddit or subreddit or doing something like that. How do I do that with like my real job?" Or even if you are already working in community or marketing, how do I position myself to do PR, or how do I do consulting, or how do I cross that barrier? And those mixers are such a helper. So if you had never done one, go. It will change your perspective on the company you work for and how you can do better, honestly.
Nice. I'll have to get a mixer. Um, Talking about starting when we started IndieCade, and was kind of like pushing a gigantic boulder up in like the Alps, because nobody really was interested in indie games back when we started. It was really before the first big indie games had hit, and so there wasn't a lot of support just on that level. Plus the fact, we from the beginning, part of what we were trying to do was showcase and elevate games that we wanted to play, or that were made by people that were more like us. And so our definition of games was much broader than people were accustomed to. And that really kind of was very hard because it shocked people, and was, again, where we were just kind of constantly having to break through myths and stereotypes. And so a whole part of the beginning phase of what we were doing was really trying to break through all of those things, and to like just explain what we were doing, kind of. But from the very ground of what we built, it was a very inclusive community, and we've always had, from the beginning, women and people of color in major roles, either in the games or in the organization itself, naturally, because of the kind of games that we have and that we highlight. It's not like we're just trying to like add people in. It's just who we are and our nature of what we're doing. And so founding it was really hard, but maintaining it is really hard too, because it's not like you build something on a solid ground and it stays. Like, our ground is growing and shifting, because even a few years ago, I don't think I would have been on this really wonderful panel that I thank you all for putting together, with so many women with with it's just a really different, like the face of what we're seeing. I mean, Donald's organization didn't even exist, a few years ago. So it's just a really different world. So you build something, but you're building it on something that's shaking and growing and changing. And so you have to keep growing with it, or you're not really, or why do it? So that's kind of what we're constantly doing, is really trying to keep seeing, like, where are the frontiers, and where are the things we can push, and where's the future, and where are the problems, and where are things still stuck, and how can we continue to bring voice to all these young and new voices that are out there that deserve it. And so that is, oh, thank you. So anyway, that's what I think we're all doing, but that's my story.
That's awesome. And I love IndieCade. That's like a perspective on the origin story of it that like makes me love it more. I think that's amazing. So I want to talk a little bit more about like what it is like to actually run these communities and to be part of a nonprofit and be a leader in nonprofits. And Nika, you're like the perfect person, I think, for this, because as the outgoing executive director of IGDA, it's the world's largest nonprofit membership organization. And you have a really large leadership team, and you've got leadership groups for individual chapters all over the globe. So can you talk more about how the IGDA leadership is structured, and what goes into electing new leaders and onboarding new people in your team?
Yeah, and I'll start with actually just providing a little bit of context. So the IGDA and the IGDA Foundation are actually two separate entities. So the IGDA Foundation is not a membership organization. We actually are 100% sponsor and donor driven. The two are separate, right? Because if the IGDA membership wants to take on issues that maybe don't agree with companies, meanwhile, the IGDA Foundation is working towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to work with those companies. That's why that boundary exists. They have separate boards, separate teams, and separate volunteers. Sometimes there's crossover. Most times there really aren't. So the IGDA Foundation is a 501c3, whereas the IGDA is the C6. And the C3 essentially focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what it means for the foundation is we worked really, really tirelessly, especially through COVID, to ensure that people who came from different backgrounds, different walks of life, maybe didn't look like the typical game developer, had a chance in the industry. It's a really real and rigid reality that game devs burn out. Like that's just the truth. Like the turnover rate is ridiculous. And then add to it, if you're a minority kind of walking into a space that wasn't really designed or built for you, right? I won't go through every category, but just imagine trying to like have kids or, childcare in the age of today's game dev, where you're constantly making patches and digital downloads and trying to negotiate with your boss and manage people. Like it's a lot. The cognitive load of making games is insane. It's unlike anything else in tech. On top of that, you've got today's circumstances, and then you've got companies that weren't necessarily built for people from marginalized backgrounds to have a chance, especially when it comes to building your own company, especially when it comes to a startup, right? If you wanted to, if it's music or movies, like you're making a movie, sure, and that's a 2-hour experience. You're making a song, you're creating a song, that's a 3-minute experience. But games is a very intensive experience that requires lots of different disciplines, lots of research and development, and a lot of front end funding. And so that barrier isn't even just to jobs, it's also access globally. I mean, video game economies don't even exist in large sectors of the world and universe. We don't talk about these things because we are trapped at home inside at COVID, trying to figure out what the hell we're going to eat tomorrow. Because man, I've had grilled cheese every day, and I really gotta diversify my food on top of like trying to deal with diverse groups of people. So when it comes to running a nonprofit, I pretty much only ran the C3 almost exclusively in COVID. I'll tell you, like, sleep was a bit of an issue because at the beginning of COVID, and Eve, man, Eve was right there with me. We had to change everything. Like, we had to throw everything out the door, the way we ran programs, the way things worked, the way we raised money. I mean, people were not giving funds to anything other than COVID-19 causes. And that is totally fair, 100% fair, absolute reality. And, I feel like when you're the outgoing ED, you're a little bit more liberated with what you can say. I did say this while I was in my role, and I'll say it now. The games industry is by far one of the least charitable experiences I have ever faced.
Preach.
I have ever faced. My gosh, prior to gaming, I actually worked for something called the Internet Association. I could literally call Snapchat's office or get patched through somebody at Sheryl Sandberg's and say, hey, I've got a lot of awesome Black and brown kids in New York that want to visit your offices and become engineers. Let's go STEM education. And bam, there would be like a check the next day. Like, let's get it done. Bus is paid for, pizza paid for. The amount of hustle that I put in for $5,000 to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in 2019. Let's actually go pre-COVID. In 2019, years later after Gamergate, years later after countless press releases and baseless commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion, unbelievable. So it was really tough. It was really tough. And I think just gaming companies are now finally wrapping their heads around what it means to work on corporate social responsibility, having initiatives, putting funding forward, because a lot of people just, it's not that people are giving you lip service because they're bad people. It's just that, like, diversity, equity, inclusion isn't an initiative you like throw under HR or you put in for 6 months and erase out of the budget line. It is a day in, day out, exhausting effort. And I have so much kudos to peers who worked on this effort before I ran the foundation. I have so much kudos to give to people who are going to continue running these initiatives, and to people who have lasted years and years trying to drive diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives in gaming. Serious kudos to them. It is laborious. It is difficult. It is one of the most meaningful things that I've ever done and will continue to do. But it is, let's just say, change does not happen overnight.
Oh, can I jump in? Is that all right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Nika and I have talked at length about this, about the lack of generosity and lack of giving as a kind of tradition in the game industry, and that is in part because it's actually a relatively young industry, and it's maturing only now, really, as big as it is. But just to piggyback on all of this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think I am seeing a sea change right now in the industry, which is very exciting to me. Which is that finally we've hit a point where we can't ignore that anymore, and people are taking the conversation, both about gender-based harm in the industry and around DEI efforts very seriously. Does that mean it's going to change overnight? Absolutely not. Does that mean it's going to be messy in the process? Absolutely yes. And I'm kind of on the backside of that, watching it be very, very messy, because that's some of the work that we do to support mental well-being, right? Is all of this work, and it's exciting, but it's about individual people in leadership learning what it means to do their work very differently, and that's not an easy, unemotional, simple process. So yeah, I think that kind of answers the question, but I do see a real the beginnings of a very promising movement in the industry right now.
I'll jump in on that. Like, I agree with Nika and Eve completely. When we started Gaming for Good, trying to get any company on for an Ebola crisis or clean water initiatives in Africa, it was like pulling teeth. Like we're asking for a 0.0001% of like game income or just charitable donations, like round up to the nearest dollar on your taxes. Hell, just give us a penny. And they're like,
Oh, I think you got muted, Erin.
oh, okay, there we go. But the moment we went to like Warner Brothers, but like before like Warner Brothers was like really into like their game studio side, I could go to like a Lisa Gregorian, I could go to these women, these amazing women. The women in our industry really do look out for each other. They like, trust me, like talk to other people in your industry, they'll reach out for you. But like I had to go to like Marvel and I had to go to Warner Brothers to do dollar for dollar matching up to $500,000. And coming from a place at ScoreSide where now we're dealing with major sports teams, there $500,000 is a drop in the bucket for most of these major sports teams. And just getting a grand, like Nika was saying, $5,000, forget about it. You're not going to get $5,000 from EA for a clean water initiative 5-10 years ago. That's never going to happen because they didn't have a clean water problem. So they didn't have a reason to set up a foundation. And now people are just starting to be like, oh, okay, maybe we'll start showing that we care. The same way some companies are like, we're going to go green by 2025. They probably won't, but it's a fun thing to say and people think nicer things of you. So we're kind of in that phase right now where these companies are just being like, oh yeah, I want to look as good as humanly possible. But it takes an effort with women like Eve and Donald and Nika and Stephanie here just to bring them to like an era of like, yeah, you can do these things for a PR reason, but you can also do them for a really good reason. And we find that cheering for your favorite sports team and giving money to a charity has the same euphoric effect. And we're just now starting to see that because fans on Twitch are donating more money than most companies do to charities. There's kids out there that are raising millions of dollars, and we're just seeing a real transition period in our industry for charitable donations. And I hope it keeps growing. My fingers are super crossed that it keeps going. We're going to see how it goes, though. You know, it's one of those things. The only thing you can do is just keep punching upwards.
And Erin, I didn't mean to like smile so big or laugh while like you're talking about such serious things. I think, you know, we're speaking to a gaming audience. Running a nonprofit in gaming, like if I'm talking the biggest, almost the biggest, weirdest challenge or whatever I have and had was that like when I was talking to my non-gaming networks or my non-gaming colleagues, they just think that our nonprofits are rolling in it because all they see is like gaming is huge and you must be set for life. I mean, I had friends be like, why are you always like working? How come like 50% of your job here is fundraising? Like you guys, how much are you really spending? Like, you know, I literally had friends that just thought we were loaded and made of money and just had like cash to throw out. And, you know, without like, you know, pulling the curtain all the way up, I had to politely explain to my friends, like the hustle is real. Like, I don't think I've ever, I don't know who's watching this. I feel like a lot of people, they, especially now, they're like, oh, I hear it all the time. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to set up my own C3. I'm going to do my own whatever. And I'm like, girl, let me tell you about the IRS.
Yep.
Let me tell you
Let me explain what a private foundation is like and how you have to pass a percentage test and how in video games, like fundraising is pretty much like all of your time and you have no time to execute on programs.
Oh, you accepted money from a different country that has different tax standards for their charitable donations? Congratulations. You have a whole new set of problems. Oh, there's
Right.
how many countries that do that? Like 32? Yeah, congratulations. You're now paying Saudi tax laws for charitable donations.
Right. Or like somebody gave you money incorrectly out of the wrong budget line and now you have to do the sad thing of giving money back. Because you can't take it.
One thing I've noticed is that fundraising has definitely been like the key most difficult thing. And you're absolutely right when Eve was talking about how there's just not a culture of philanthropy in the game industry, and a lot of people who've made a lot of money, and there's just not this kind of culture of giving back in that way. But even within the game industry, like Nika was saying, oh, your friends from outside the game industry, like, oh, you guys must be rolling in dough. Even within the game industry, the game makers are convinced we have tons of money because we're an established brand of some kind. And I don't know where they think that money is coming from. It's not coming from them, but it's really, you know, there's a real misconception that I think people think that organizations that have a reputable brand that they believe in, something they believe in, and I think they feel like if they emotionally believe in it or intellectually believe in it, then it has some kind of resources. And so they don't have to give to it or whatever, but it is really challenging.
Stephanie,
It's
do you have
funny
a,
that
oh, sorry, go ahead, Donald.
I was just gonna say it's funny to hear all of y'all's horror stories about raising money and things like that. So my organization is about 2 years old. I've done it out of my own pocket because of all of those horror stories that I've heard. It's just like, if I could, you know, maybe that may be a reason why my organization isn't much larger, but like, I'm just like, oh man, I don't want to deal with any of that.
Stephanie, can you tell me how many indie games are what we would consider traditionally profitable? Is it like a 10% basis or less than that?
Oh gosh, I actually have no idea, especially because it depends how you define indie games. Like if you're talking about like immersive theater, I don't think any profit at all. I think if you're talking about PC games, I think they almost all end up breaking even on some level.
And
So
I think that
making money, maybe 1 out of 10. So, you know, it just kind of like depends. But I would say that most people in the industry or people who submit to us, don't tend to have day jobs. So a lot of them are kind of making it by being developers.
So I know from where Nika and I are coming from, I used to write comprehensive tax plans for companies to give money to be like, hey, you made this product. This is what your overhead is. This is how much you'd save in taxes. Do you think a comprehensive tax plan would be applicable for indie developers? Because when I say successful, I would say anything over, what is it, like the $3 million margin?
That's a pretty high threshold for an indie game company.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, because you're talking about like a lot of companies and stuff where just starting a company is kind of new. And then if they're successful, a lot of them also get kind of snapped up. So it's such a funny.
Yeah, I was like, I wonder if we should write a tax plan for
space.
them. But you're right. If I had a nickel for every time a Tencent or a Activision or a indie developer that was under an umbrella corporation was snapped up by a much larger company, I'd probably not have to raise charity. I would just give to charity. So
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting, Erin, and to Stephanie's point, is that I was going to jump in and say that, you know, the industry is a very cyclical, very hit-driven business, and so there's a really high margin between what's successful and what's not, and most games are not, right? And so there is a sense of fragility in this industry that may, I think, contribute to this kind of funding challenge and this kind of yeah, and as the industry matures, I see this kind of mid-level of indie studio or for hire studio that really does have some space to give and is starting to understand their responsibility to the community. But I think because so much of the industry is really on the edge, it really changes the calculus a lot and the culture, the set of assumptions that people have. Yeah.
I want to go back because there's something that Nika and Eve, you both have brought up previously about like mental health and harassment and inequality in the game industry. And this is something that's huge, like this year, especially because you've been seeing the Activision Blizzard lawsuit. I know, at least either if we're not directly involved, we're all watching it from the outside and seeing how that's going to make an impact on the rest of the game industry. And something that you had said, Eve, is that, you know, people are starting to take notice. That like, you know, we really do need to change things and people are starting to take it more seriously. So I'm interested to hear from either of you or anyone else who wants to jump in, like what are things that you're seeing people do to create like real action to improve working conditions, especially as it relates to inequality.
I can jump in because we're doing work right now actually. so as I mentioned at the start, Take This does training and workshops and consulting with the game industry. We have developed, in partnership with the Games and Online Harassment Hotline Feminist Frequency, a multi-part intervention in game companies, and we're seeing studio interest, some robust studio interest in that intervention, which is really about acknowledging harm, repairing harm, and moving on and addressing it. I didn't think at the beginning when we were working through this idea that we were going to get the traction that we're getting in the industry. To do real reparative work around decades of harassment and abuse and trauma is really hard, and to do it meaningfully and to support companies in making sustainable, accountable change requires education and consulting and policy change at every level of the organization, and really like strong leadership commitment. And that's what we are requiring of people who do this work, and people are interested in it, and that's kind of amazing. That's kind of amazing, and that's what's giving me hope right now, is that this is not going to be a straightforward process, but people really want to talk about accountability. People really want to talk about repair, and people are really trying to figure out how to do right. So yeah. I mean, it's going to be messy, but there's progress towards it.
So this is like, I love Eve. I love Eve so much because I have like a different approach. I'm jaded. I'm absolutely jaded. In the short period of time I was at the IGDA Foundation, right? And I'm steeped in this effort of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was very steeped in it. I actually joined the IGDA Foundation because gaming actually ricocheted me back into academics. I was a PhD researcher. IGDA Foundation was supposed to be this part-time job before COVID hit. And I told my board, I'm not here to be a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. I'm just here because here's my life situation, and this shit just shouldn't be hard. And I'm going to demonstrate how we can create tangible, actionable solutions, because I'm so tired about everybody else talking about it. And in my short period of time at being at the foundation, and maybe it wasn't that short, to me it's like dog years, right? But I had to put out 4 statements during 4 different news cycles that broke into mainstream media on sexual harassment in gaming. And then prior to that, I was kind of doing diversity. It was like 15% of my job. I went through Gamergate. I went through with the Me Too era of claims, of the very kind of the rounds that also hit Hollywood. And then prior to that, like I have now gone through so many news cycles of this company did this, and these women are coming forward, or these, people are coming forward. And so I love the mantra of like, let's change things, let's make change happen. But at the end of the day, I got to a point where I was like, I'm not going to boil the ocean. It's not my skill set to boil the ocean. If it is your skill set to boil the ocean, call me. I'd love to learn from you. And so what are the micro ambitious ways to tackle this? And for me, and even just like the bandwidth and the resources I had available, it was a low return on my investment to try to change people. I was like, I am so sick and tired of trying to change them, because I felt that people just had the memory of a goldfish. Oh, people stopped tweeting about it. Now I can go on and right. Like, I don't know who's being shitty and who's being whatever, or if those attitudes are changing or not. So went for a different approach, a little bit more of a bottom up. I am going to find awesome rising leaders, future leaders, mid-career leaders that are diverse, authentic, humble, awesome, good at their craft, and get them into leadership. I was like, I'm done with our current slate of people. Who wants to stick around? Who's thinking about leaving, and why? Can we find safe studios, less bureaucratic places, maybe AA? Like, let's get them a chance through other means and mechanisms. I want to see somebody go to a startup and then watch their stock options they got just skyrocket and become bazillionaires because they know to pay it forward and not be shitty once they get to the top. I want to talk to people who are going to remember. I still remember what it was like to go door to door for my first job. The people who are hungry and humble, those are the people in leadership that are going to make change. Those are the people that I want to help walk through their paths, because I have now seen news cycles of harassment in gaming since I've been involved since 2013. So for me, it's just the humble time of 7, 8 years. If I had started with like bomb interns 8 years ago, those people could have been senior directors now. So that's where I wanted to start. That was the tackle. That was the approach that I took, that kind of middle up strategy, as well as the bottom up and the career shifting. And no, never pushing people to stay in or like suck it up and you can grind. But like, it was always about what's the best shot, because if you support 100 people, one of them's going to make it, one of them's going to make it to the top. And that's kind of what it ended up being, a divide and conquer strategy. I love Eve. I love what Take This is doing, right? IGDA Foundation is not a mental health organization, not trained in that. We were trained in the workforce. We want to see more people who look not like the people who are currently running things and not get those jobs. Oh, just because I'm diverse. They're good at their craft. They deserve that opportunity. The color of their skin, their background, their whatever, who cares? Like, just respect and don't be shitty.
You covering the burnout is like, it's pretty accurate, if I'm being honest. Like, if I had a nickel for every time I saw a talented person, regardless of race, regardless of color, just be the most talented person and be like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I just don't know what I'm doing anymore. And we're just now starting to address like, oh, hey, yeah, maybe your employees shouldn't want to kill themselves through workload and lack of pay. Maybe they shouldn't. Call it crazy, am I right? A livable wage? What? Get out of here. That's nuts. And then we wonder why we're not seeing a philanthropic effort from these major studios. You know what I mean, Nika? You know what I'm talking about.
So yeah,
Go ahead, Eve.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize, but yeah, I mean, first, I go to therapy every week, and I need it because this work is hard, and it isn't always a straight line. I'm very hopeful, right? I present that, and that's part of, I guess, my job is to be a very hopeful voice in this work and a cheerleader. But that takes an emotional toll, right, over time. But also, like, oh gosh, now I've lost the last. I was thinking about what you were saying, Erin. Oh, about not about burnout. I've lost what I was going to say, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. I wanted to pull Donald into this because, I mean, D&I is at the heart of ATX, and you were talking earlier about people who've come up in your community who you've seen now, like sitting in the executive rooms to be part of those discussions, and like that's the goal, to build people up and support them and get them into those places where they can make decisions. So I want to hear more about what ATX Game Makers and what you've been doing for this. I know you have a lot of educational events. You have like a diverse hiring 101 piece on your blog that I really, really liked. It's like, everybody should read this. But yeah, I'd love to hear more from you about that.
Yeah, so with the event like Diverse Hiring 101, we've had some panels of our own that we've broadcasted about diverse hiring, and the goal there. So there's two ways to attack this problem, right? So one, we want to equip people who are trying to get into the industry to understand that they may be going into studios that are non-diverse. And it was actually, it's funny that you asked me this question, because I just had this conversation earlier about preparing people to go into studios that, they might be the first female in the studio, right? Or they might be the first person of color in the studio. And so be prepared for that, right? Number one, like Nika said, don't be a shitty person. If you can like manage just that bottom line, because there's a lot of people who will go into those situations and they could come in with a chip on their shoulder. So number one, don't be a shitty person. And then number two, when I do events like that, the diverse hiring and things like that, I'm targeting the old guard, the folks that are already there, that are, you know, they may not understand their unconscious biases. They may not see the things that they are doing when they're hiring people or putting out adverts that are maybe written in such a way. Like, I remember way back in the day, there was like a job posting about working at a studio, and it's like, yo, come and be a Billy Badass at this studio, and you know, we're gonna guns and shooting and testosterone. You're like, you're gonna make a lot of people not want to work for your studio just for the sheer what is it called, keyboard jockiness that you're putting out there, right? It's just, yeah, a lot of people aren't going to feel comfortable working for the studio, and so, you know, we're trying to attack it from both ends. So it's always an educational thing. There's a lot of things that I do outside of that where I will go and have conversations with different leaders in the industry to talk about things that I see on their websites, and talk about ways that they can tap into my community or other communities to attract, you know, a more diverse crowd, right? And so that's the name of the game. Like, number one, they have to open their doors and be more attractive to a diverse crowd. And number two, we got to show more people that gaming is an opportunity for them, right? So that was one of the things, like when I was younger, I didn't know I could make video games. I didn't know I could provide a living for my family making games. That was never an option to me. It was sports, or, you know, my parents got me into the cello. But yeah, this is where I ended up. So
kind of a little bit of a pivot, but I want to bring Stephanie in because you have a lot of events that you were talking about this a little bit before our panel started. But IndieCade is really busy right now running all kinds of events, and I know the Indie Exchange is one that's coming up pretty shortly in October. And a lot of these are geared towards supporting developers long term, and like the developers that you have that submit to IndieCade. It's a longer relationship and like more support and a full community. And so I'm interested in hearing more about like how IndieCade is supporting developers throughout all of this, throughout their career as they continue working post IndieCade.
Well, from the beginning, our feeling was that, you know, we wanted to run a festival, but festivals are kind of competitions. And so it's like you send in your game and that's kind of it. You get in or you get out. And we were really interested in building a community, but not just building a community, but helping to build the platform for who could be the future voices in the industry and impacting it. And we used to, when we were at E3 for so many years, we'd notice like our booth would have all these really wacky, great games and different looking game makers than the rest of the show floor. And, you know, the next year or years later, those people were out in the other, you know, in Nintendo's booth or in PlayStation's booth. And so we kind of were able to watch that was kind of what was happening, that we were just kind of like, all of us are kind of leading the pack. So one thing we're really invested in is leveling up the developers and creators, and, you know, building that community. So our Indie Exchange is an example of that. If you submit your game to IndieCade, we then invite you, whether you got in or not, but mostly for people who actually didn't get in. We create an entire conference, and it's created by our alumni, and it changes every year what it is, and it's all like whatever are the most relevant topics for people, and also opportunities to showcase works in progress, get feedback from colleagues, get mentoring, like all of that kind of stuff. So those are like really important components to what we do. And while we do that, we had been doing it once a year, but people had to come into town for it. Now that it's digital, it really breaks down a lot of barriers for us in terms of being able to have some of these, because we have creators like in the festival alone, we have people from the Philippines as well as from like Lithuania and Scandinavia and Mexico. And, you know, when you have people from so many different places, it really gives people a chance to connect. And I know people talk about that with the bigger events, but like these are pretty intimate how we set them up. And we're now trying to do them more regularly so that people have more touch points and opportunities to connect. And then we also have a membership program. So people who are they're just developers, people who are developers or students who are interested in being part of that community can join in also. So we do events like that. And then we also do events that are kind of like on the edge because we're constantly bringing things in. So things like playable theater is one that we're doing right now. So like live performance, playable theater, alt control, like things that you don't get as much in some of the other programming that's already out there so that people can connect.
I have, by the way, I've always said that IndieCade at E3 is what E3 really should be, which is like, it really is. Like, they had a sound bath room where you played a video game and there was a sound bath element to it. It was one of the most interesting ways to like experience gaming. And every time I've gone to IndieCade, it's just, there's always something new. When the 8-bit gaming craze really started taking like a turn to like be a little bit more prevalent, that was at IndieCade. That was developers coming from internationally. IndieCade is amazing and should be what E3 really needs to be. I love IndieCade.
Thank you, and we'll be online in about a month, so people should
Yay!
watch our 48 games on Twitch, on our Twitch. Subscribe to our IndieCade Twitch channel. It's all free, and you can even register for free and play a bunch of the games. Because one thing a bunch of our indie devs did this year was make games that work online for a lot of people. And so we have a couple games in the festival, like people can all play together and everything. It's really nice, and all the developers will be there and represented. So thank you. I think so too. We actually, for the first time in, I think we've been doing it the whole time, 17 years. First time we weren't at E3 was this past year, and we established a new show ourselves for students called Horizons that is like an international student showcase for all the games because we realized students didn't have a place to show their games. So,
oh my God, I love that.
I know, they did a pilot last year. It's like our new thing. We love it. Spring.
That's so cool. That's so amazing.
Yeah, and you're talking a little bit about it now, but like a lot of the events that all of you run or a lot of your communities and your groups we're so dependent on like different versions of in-person connection, right? Like a con, being at something like E3 or at GDC, or just having networking events and opportunities for people to make those connections, if those were largely centered around in-person events. So I'm interested in hearing, and Stephanie, you kind of started talking about this already, but more about like how you had to pivot at the beginning of COVID to keep doing what you wanted to do, but in a new way that like worked for people to do that online, to like make the connection they needed online to network or participate in something like IndieCade.
Yeah, one thing was we were just planning the festival back in March when COVID started to go bad, and we immediately pivoted digital before we even knew that it was going to be bad. It just seemed questionable because we have such a big European contingent and we knew kind of what was going on really early. But it gave us the opportunity to work with our European group. So we had two separate events. One was in Europe and one was in the US with two different organization groups. And once we all got together as like one unit, it was kind of spectacular to kind of start to think globally, and it's time zones are really hard to navigate, so that's really hard. But just having like diverse people, like people coming from so many different places and perspectives, working on it, you come up with all kinds of solutions for connecting or for thinking about things that you wouldn't otherwise. So it's not like you just throw open a Discord channel, right? You have just all kinds of different ways that people want to connect. And so we've tried a bunch of those, including Discord channels, of course. But playing games together, connecting together, mentoring, stuff that Donald's talked about too. Like, oh, we've tried a bunch of stuff, and a bunch of it works.
Yeah, that's beautiful the way you've talked about it, Stephanie. We pivoted online. We were very focused on attending conventions where we have on our AFK room program, and it turned out that we had suddenly so much more access to spaces, back to budget. We couldn't travel. We couldn't do a lot of events. And suddenly with online access, we were showing up in spaces we wouldn't have otherwise been able to show up in, and working with people we wouldn't have otherwise had conversations with. And it was really transformative for us, actually. I mean, I'm very much looking forward to return to conventions. I'm really looking forward to GDC. I'm on the advisory board. I'm excited for it, et cetera. But, I think, it's been a very interesting, unexpectedly interesting time during COVID for us, as much as it's been very stressful because mental health issues have been such a challenge, like really profound challenge.
I also want to say last year, there were a lot of relief and incentive and tax things because of COVID. But this year, all of us who do live events aren't able to do our live events again this year. And that stuff doesn't exist this year. So this year is actually in some ways harder than last year, which I don't know if people are that aware of.
Well, we saw what happened with PAX. It was kind of a little bit of a ghost town, a little bit. The people that did have money, COVID hit everybody financially very differently, but the people that did have money were able to go. But let's face it, it wasn't quite what we wanted it to be, even with limited attendance. So when we take a step back and start looking at it, how will this pandemic actually affect our live events, including eSports tournaments and a night to unite, a charitable banquet, things like that. Where do we take a step back and look to see how a pandemic actually affects philanthropy? And in all honesty, I do see a decline in it through the pandemic. People are sad. They're not people who are deeply depressed. There's no reason for somebody that is hurting on the inside to give money when there's no reason that they feel like they should. Does that make sense?
Not to be sorry about your demise. We weirdly had the opposite problem. We had a very difficult first year, and then we grew. We flourished at the there's a give and take, right? So we flourished, but what it took was it took a lot from the staff and volunteers. The IGDA Foundation typically awards 60-ish scholarships. We basically fly people from around the world to the Game Developers Conference. They go through a 1-week boot camp. Then we put them on planes and we send them out of here. And what happened was that, the GDC got canceled last minute. Even right before GDC, we actually went viral because we had 2 women from Pakistan who were denied visas to come to GDC, and it made international news because they developed a game about being denied access because their visa was rejected because getting a job in game development wasn't recognized as a real thing.
But how brilliant of an idea.
We're not sending you to a video game conference, right? That's right. There's still that stigma that exists. And so on top of canceling and not flying, right? All of a sudden now we're canceling 60 flights and 60 hotel rooms and reworking letters for people. And all of our sponsors, none of the funding came in, even though we spent all that money. So I was like, oh shoot. Now I'm not there anymore. So I'm going to call them out, and I'm great. I'm really close with the 2020 cohort. I referred to them pleasantly as my babies. In 2021, our 2021 cohort, they call me the potato lord. Every year it's very different. We grew, but my babies in 2020, they actually unionized and wrote a letter about how upset they were that we were taking them virtual, and that we should, like everybody else, move them to 2021 and fly them and give them automatic acceptances. And our philosophy was, no, we're not going to wait. I said, no, I put them all in a virtual private town hall. I said, no, let me tell you why I'm telling you no. We're not going to wait 9 months for you to find a job and start your life. Just because there's a pandemic going on doesn't mean that like your craft goes on hold, your skills go on hold. Your bills aren't going to be on hold, right? Like you have to start your life eventually. And so we're going to adapt and we're going to go, because the foundation might not exist next year. So not only are we not punting you to next year, I might not have a job, my team might not have a job. And so we're going to go out and we're just going to do this. This is our biggest shot. And because we pivoted to virtual so early, and we all of a sudden had this talent pipeline, a 1-week boot camp became a summer-long experience. And at the last minute, like 15 companies came in, veterans that we would have never had like the time of day with at GDC were giving us hours of their time. We had mentors from around the world. And the following year, we went from having 60 to over 100 people that were given a form of scholarship or a recipient. And we also secured over $250,000 in funding to re-grant to an additional 30 game developers looking to design their prototype game. So pivoting really early and going into like survivor mode and calling everybody night and day, like all through March, all through April, all through May. Eve was there. We did a fundraiser together. That was an interesting experiment. I mean, my 20-hour-a-week job became like an 80-hour-a-week job because I didn't want to be the one to let go of my entire team due to COVID. I was like, I refuse.
So your charitable donations are mostly like saving the industry, prepping for game developer stuff. I'm thinking I might be talking more on the like, I have an individual thing with the Lakers. I want to create a breast cancer awareness thing.
Yeah.
We saw a little bit of a dip in single donor when it came to private charities, not so much in the game developer stuff. Oddly, much like some of the restaurant industry, people really like came together during COVID to like just hold arms and lock it down. You know what I mean?
So I want to move us to the live Q&A because we're running out of time here, and we do have some questions that have come in through the Twitch chat. So if we can try to keep these answers relatively short if possible. We have a question someone has asked: who are some of the notable not shitty leaders and people out there in the industry we should know about? And I mean, all of you, I think, is probably the honest answer, but if there's like people that you think would be good people for folks to follow who are looking to get into games or looking for good examples, do you have anybody that comes to mind?
I'm gonna refrain from using names because I think that's a kind of a dangerous path to walk down. But I'm gonna give some advice about how to vet people when you're looking for a job, which is remember that when you interview for jobs, you are interviewing them and they are interviewing you. This is an opportunity to determine best fit on both sides. And when you do that, it's incumbent that you ask really specific questions about the way that they practice transparency, the way that they deal with conflict, the commitment they have, and take this, we don't use the word work-life balance, we talk about work-life separation, right? Because it's not really a balance, especially when you're a parent. It's a separation. Like, do you have, are there ways, mechanisms in place to protect your time and space? Is there respect for those kinds of ideas? Are values operationalized in very specific ways? And those are the questions that you ask or that you can do, research on, that will tell you the most about a place to work and the work environment there. Yeah, I think I'll stick with that.
I'll add to Eve's comment about the interview process. Just always remember that a company is going to treat you the best during the interview process. So if you are asking those questions that Eve just asked, and you get a little feeling, remember that's the best you're going to probably get from that company.
We have another question. I think, Erin, you may be a good person to answer this one. They asked, if you could wave a magic wand and change one single thing about fundraising, what would it be?
Oh man, the integration between like basically all communities and major companies. There's really no way to kind of make the gap between their community and their companies. So like while their community will raise millions of dollars for the charity that the gaming company wants to use, the gaming company doesn't really ever hear their fans in the same way. And I wish I could just wave a big magic wand to like kind of just serialize all of that stuff. And unfortunately, most companies just don't have anything in place to like platform their charities. So if every company would just hire some form of philanthropy expert or some kind of charitable expert, it would make all of our lives just so much easier because then I don't have to explain the difference between a 3 and a 6 charity every single time. Which, by the way, if you're wondering what that is, it's politics. It literally is just politics and like 3 other things. So I just wish more companies had that. EA has one, Activision just hired another one. There are companies that are starting to do that, but trust me, we're speaking Latin to people that don't. So it's harder than that. So if more companies just would hire a third party person, it would just make my life so much easier.
All right, we have another question. Wondering if the panel can speak on the huge lack of Black and Latin folks in the industry. Would love to hear some insight on that as a Black POC trying to break into the industry myself.
Well, I'll step out in that one. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's a huge lack in it. That is one of the major inspirations for me starting ATX Game Makers. A lot of folks ask me why didn't I start it and call it like Blacks in Gaming, which is already out there. That's an organization out there. But so my children are half Hispanic as well, and so like I wanted to try and attack a broader range of folks as far as diversity is concerned. But what I will say is that while there is a lack out there, there is a lot more out there than you may know. You're going to have to do some work in finding folks. Feel free to reach out to me. My Twitter handle is Tall Gamer. I can help try and pair you up with a mentor in the field that you're wanting to get into gaming, or hit me up on LinkedIn, Donald Harris. Look me up on LinkedIn, and I'll definitely connect you to the right folks. Right. So that's, you know, it currently is the way it is. Right. It's not a lot of them out there. Get out there. Let's connect. I will connect you to the folks that I know. There's other organizations besides ATX Game Makers. Like I said, there's BIG, which is Blacks in Gaming. There is Latinx in Gaming, which is another huge organization. And so they're out there. The groups are out there. It's, you know, you have to do some work, but yeah, they're out there. And you can find mentors in each of those categories and people to help you get into the industry.
I think we're like at the beginning also of a big change here because there's a couple of things. There are people out there. I mean, it's not, it depends what parts of the game industry you look at also, like what you see. But in terms of like the mainstream industry, it's definitely not, doesn't have the kind of diversity it should, like by a long shot. And it's, I think, really hard to break into because of the culture. Which is why these organizations are so important for support. But it's also really important for all of us to be placing a spotlight on the diversity that does exist and the successes behind that. Especially there's like a lot of Latinx game creators, like working like kind of all over the industry. And I think that those organizations have done a pretty good job of like also of highlighting. And I think that's really like super important. But one thing I'm also noticing, you brought up higher education before. If you look at schools, the schools are starting to be more and more diverse, but also community colleges and places like that are starting to have game programs. And that's where you have a much more diverse population. And so, you know, if we get invited to go speak somewhere or do something, if we can put our efforts into places like community colleges and high schools and things like that, I think that's where we can help foster more diversity in the industry.
In 30
Mike.
seconds on, yeah, 30 seconds on this real quick. Like, we ran a historically Black colleges and universities cohort for the first time in addition to our other cohorts we run. We just, the fact of the matter is we reached out to almost every single HBCU, and unlike our scholars program or velocity or next gen leaders, there are just better pipelines at other colleges, universities where they have game design, they have faculty really invested. HBCUs are totally catching up on that. I mean, I single-handedly was like, why don't we have enough applicants? Why don't we have enough, maybe what we consider strong applicants? And we went through, and a lot of our HBCU kids that came in, they literally were like, I'm in my computer science program. I don't think my computer science program is at all helping me in what I need to do to become a game developer. And they were right. I opened up their coursework, their curriculum. The only reason our HBCU cohort was even successful in the way it was, and it was very one-on-one compared to our scholars. And so there's a huge educational disparity there. The only reason they were in there is because we reached out to we got responses from a few faculty that we cold called that really advocated for their students. And the number of faculty that are advocating for video game design, for example, just in HBCUs versus like colleges and programs that are fully like fledged building out game design, investing in it, et cetera, in addition to their computer science programs, it's a massive, massive disparity. And there's a massive lack of encouragement of game design as a viable career pathway and pipeline, and especially communities that maybe are in the United States, at least coming from immigrant families, you know, where parents are not supporting or endorsing, like, what do you mean? You know, like, it is very, very games 101. It is a huge, huge educational barrier that we need to be working on. We need to really beef up programming and make it robust and accessible.
By the way, just as like to add on to that, having a specialized career or a specialized degree in video games is something very new. It used to not be a thing. So if you are currently working in video games and you're like, I don't have this like video game degree, no one has it. Okay? No one does. It's very new. Oh, but I don't have a degree in business. I do biz dev and partnership. I studied bugs. You're gonna be okay. I
Yep.
promise you. And I will. And you're like, oh, but I don't have a degree in communications. How am I going to run community? I'd rather you run a forum or some kind of fan group so I know that you know how to manage people. Trust me, there's a million ways, and people are constantly looking at your background in a way that isn't just a higher education.
I will push back for, sorry, I know we're supposed to keep our answers short, but like,
Okay.
I will push back, Erin, only in that in our current wave of hiring with like AI kind of scraping through resumes and stuff, I think there is part of the change is people are now starting to expect, especially entry level, they are expecting just on the art side, people want to see portfolios now. People want to see fully playable prototypes and demos before they're going to fund you. I think the standards are changing and that people are asking for experience. I mean, I saw somebody ask for like a senior hire. Oh, you need 15 years of experience in gaming. Like, are you kidding me? Like, okay, so like 3 people are going to be eligible for this
you're gonna
job.
hire Mike Fisher to run
Right.
your game.
I mean, I do think that like you do, especially in COVID, if you want to work in gaming, it's okay to not know what you want to do because nobody knows what they want to do and everybody just kind of floats their way in and some accident happens and they land a gig. But I do think you have to hustle 100 times harder in COVID. And I do think that industry standards are changing and people want a little bit more maybe it's not ever going to be a one-to-one because the jobs are nebulous. Like nobody goes to school to become like a technical artist, VFX voiceover guy for game, right? Like but I do think that the standards are changing. I do think that if your resume and your background, or if maybe your background doesn't match in the higher ed, like you still have to like go to a game jam or find a community on Discord or do something for fun or design for fun or do IndieCade, whatever it takes, because I think people are now looking for gaming experience, even from a freaking internship level.
Which is where I come from, which is like just get into a community of some kind. Yeah, the artist stuff, needing like an advanced like full sail degree for VFX stuff, never really. But art is interpretive, right? So I do biz dev and partnerships, and I manage community teams. I would much rather have a kid that understood how to manage a Rooster Teeth and a 4chan forum than a kid with a communications degree, unfortunately, because they know an advanced level of trolling.
We should move on. We have a couple more questions left. One is hopefully quick. Is ATX Game Makers open to people who live outside of Boston?
Yes, that is my lack of creativity in coming up with a name. But yes, we have members all over the place. So yes, please come on in. www.atxgamemakers.com.
All right, the next question, how are you using streaming and influencer marketing to grow your initiatives?
Currently, I'm just hiring pro sports players to do that. So unfortunately, I don't think I can add too much to that one.
We did it. I didn't enjoy it. It's not in my skill set. The problem with influence, here's the thing. I don't really TikTok. I don't really Snapchat. I'm a flack, right? Like I go to bed at 8:30 now. Like here's my problem with influencers is just that like I would send an email and they'd be like, "Oh, we want to support you and whatever." And then I'd be like, "Cool, you free Tuesday or Thursday?" And they would send back like pizza emoji. And I was like, "What?" I don't speak influencer. What I ended up doing is over time, by asking a lot, I got in touch through friends of friends with some older influencers that maybe have a little bit of more of a schedule or a manager or maturity. But the space of like esports and brand influence, it just the fact of the matter is it just took up way more time, and I was not effective trying to do corporate donor relations, program management, volunteer management. So we ended up scaling down influencer kind of marketing because I didn't have the patience to be like, "What do you mean?" Right? Like every time I emailed or spoke with an influencer, I just felt like I was talking to aliens. And I respect their craft and I get it. They spend 80 hours a day on a computer and they're like, "Wiggity wiggity whack." Like, and I'm just kind of like, I can't.
Nika is 100% right though. 100%
I couldn't do
right.
it.
When you're looking at the esports field, like I will only talk to like certain teams that have a manager, because talking to 6 kids on the same team, it doesn't work. So having somebody that is their manager, it lets me know that they're a little bit more serious about offers and things like that. It's a whole esports and then the influencer side and then the sports side of everything. It's just a separate entity altogether. It's a whole different wheelhouse.
We have limited ourselves to working with streamers who become ambassadors, who want to work with us and want to become mental health advocates. And we promote them and we train them and we invest a lot of time and support and relationship building. And that's been the only way that's been really effective for us. Occasionally influencers will be brought to us through some sort of a partnership. We just did one with Buy Boost, and that was like totally random and a little weird. But what's been very effective is really identifying people who are mission aligned and bringing them in and creating a community around them.
We've done a lot of streaming, and I think that, and we don't have influencers. It's all of our alumni. So it's game makers, who sometimes have streams, streaming other people's games. And it is a really nice community building part of what we're doing.
Yeah, we did start streaming, but it's small. It's fun, but it's small.
So we're just about out of time here, and we talked about a lot of really heavy topics today. So in our closing round, I'd like you to let people know where they can find your community, where they can connect with you or your community online, and also add, if you can, what's the thing that you love most about game development, or the thing that you're really excited about right now, because I want to make sure we end on a high note amidst all of the very important but I think heavier topics that we've covered today. So I'm going to go in the order of how you are in my screen. So Erin, you're up first.
Okay, so I'm the partnership director at ScoreSide. ScoreSide basically is this amazing app that makes it easy to give to any team or any event that you would ever want to be a part of. And I'm currently working right now with LifePack, who, if you know their campaigns, they did Bow, Pass the Mic, and Project Red. They're doing an amazing charity where trying to end child malnutrition and hunger throughout the world, starting in Africa. Huge deal. And I was at Gaming for Good. It's now a $25 million charity plus after 10 years. So there is room for that. And I want to see us grow with compassion and kindness in our communities. And I think it's a possibility. I really do.
Donald?
Yeah, so Donald Harris again. The community is ATX Game Makers, which again, we're open to people from around the world. I just live in Austin, Texas. So you can find the community over at www.atxgamemakers.com. There's a link to our Discord server. Come on in, join the conversation. And no matter where you are in your career, there'll be someone there to help you out or work with you on your game or work with you to get you into the games industry. Or you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Tall Gamer. And then, yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Donald Harris. So definitely feel free to hit me up. I'm always here to help.
What are you most excited about in games right now?
Right now, the most exciting thing for me is just seeing all of the creativity. So a group of friends of mine just released a game, Alpha Link. And it's Mandy Laurie and her husband, and so it's a husband and wife team that's just released this game on Xbox, and that's so amazing to me. And just seeing things like that, I just like that creativity. I just like I'm more excited about the indie side than I am probably the AAA side, just because that's where I think a lot of the creativity comes from.
Sure. Yeah. Stephanie?
I'm Stephanie Barish again, and please check out any of our events or join us at IndieCade.com. Everything is on there. We stream regular Twitch shows and we have our festival and our events. So love to have people join us and reach out. We're friendly. I think I agree with Donald. The thing that keeps me going all the time is just the incredible creativity. I'm just always so excited and blown away by the new ideas everybody has, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know our new batch of games that we just announced. But and the people, I really think the people are great.
Cool. Eve?
Yeah, so I'm Eve Crevichet. I'm the executive director of Take This. We have a mental health resources page on our website. If you go to takethis.org, there's a big orange rectangle right in the middle of the homepage. Has a comprehensive list of crisis hotlines, emotional support lines, advice on how to find a therapist or find other resources online. We also have a community resources page to connect to community, because finding your people is one of the greatest predictors of mental well-being. It's one of the most important protective factors, is finding people who are your support. So I encourage you to check out those resources that can help you find what you need. The thing that's making me excited about the game industry right now is that there's a new generation of people making games that are just doing extraordinary things in the way that they build their companies, in the way that they are thinking about what games are and how they're made. There's never been a greater diversity of exciting and really fantastic games. And that's beautiful. I keep saying things, I'm like, oh, wow. And my husband just made a game that August is involved in at Spry Fox called Cozy Grove. And it's one of many games with great mental health themes. And I'm seeing those more and more, and I'm really proud of that game. And my brother, big plug, also made the music for that game. So yeah.
I'm also pretty proud of Cozy Grove personally. Nika.
Yeah, if you're checking out the IGDA Foundation community, go to igdafoundation.org. I believe they'll be opening up. Double check their Twitter and stuff. Subscribe to their Twitter at IGDA Foundation. Check out their website. They're going to open up scholarships again sometime next year, probably end of spring, though that may change because I'm not there. But so double check with the new or email our interim executive director, spears@igdafoundation.org, just to know when that's happening, whether you are trying to get your first job in the industry or you're mid-career and, you know, just totally done with the world and just looking for somebody or a program to talk through it. Definitely apply. I highly recommend it. It's a great space. It is a safe space. In terms of what I'm excited about, I'm excited about my new job. It was really hard to leave nonprofit and advocacy. That's pretty much all I've ever really known, but I'm excited about my new job. It's so exciting. It pulled me away, and you know, we're working. It's GenVid Entertainment is the first registered entity that is working on publishing massive interactive live events. And I really think that what we're doing is the future of gaming. And I am so excited that I'm still not sure what I am or am not allowed to talk about project-wise because I just finished onboarding. But we have a lot of exciting stuff coming out. And I can't wait to shout it from the rooftops. I love new, innovative, ingenious things, you know, so done with cardboard cookie cutter, like everything is pew 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 gaming, which is fine. I love that too, but like, you know, it's time to grow. We're on the internet now. Let's move away from the DVD cartridge side of gaming and do something cool. So I love it. That's what I'm excited about. But you know, if you like the pew pews, by all means, I'm here for it.
Well, thank you all again for being here and for sharing with us, sharing your experiences. I super appreciate you all for your time and for all of the work that you're doing for developers and community too.
Thank you. You're a great moderator.
Thank you for moderating.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks. Oh. I'm going to turn it back over to Ben so we can see the results of our poll for the charity donation tonight.
Thanks, everyone. So, and thanks again to all of our panelists. That was a great panel. Just as a reminder to everyone, our team has been live tweeting this, so you can go check out if you want to, catch particular events, particular highlights. They're all on Twitter, and we will be posting the video from this panel to our YouTube page. So you'll be able to go back and see where, if you want to, recall any of the particular parts of the conversation. So the results of the charity panel, we had a tie between the Adiola Ajayi Foundation and the Eleanor Cook Foundation, Life Pack. And so we're going to split the donation half and half between them. So we'll have $250 going to each of those organizations. So yeah, thank you all for participating.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Right on.